What's going on, everybody? And today we need to talk about 6-piece set items. The current server paragon is 112, very close to 150. I'm usually hovering about 11 levels above, so in about 2 to 3 weeks, a lot of players are going to start accessing paragon 150, which means they have access to 6-piece set items. So we're going to rate every single one for every class. Let's get into it. So first off, we're going to go through each set effect and talk about how the 6-piece set effect actually works. And then we're going to tier them on the tier list for each class. There are 8 sets, and we're going to start off with Untouchable Mount Bank. Now this set gives you a chance when your shield expires, a 25% chance to explode for 40% of your maximum life. Now this shield is talking about the shield that Untouchable Mount Bank gives when you have a 2-piece set, and that is every single time you take damage, you have a 20% chance to gain a shield, and it can't occur every more than once every 9 seconds. And it's equal to 13% of your maximum life. And so based on what we could read from this set effect is that once it expires, meaning once it's kind of shot through or it just goes away, it has a chance to explode for 40% of this life total right here, which is a massive number. Then we have Grace of the Flagellant set, and this 6-piece set effect is going to have every single time you deal damage, you have a 4% chance to unleash a lightning strike, dealing X damage. This damage will be based on your character, and then it will also stun them for 1 second. Can occur more than every 40 seconds. Basically an additional possible damage strike with a 4% chance to activate and a 40-second internal cooldown. Then we have the Feasting Barons pack. This 6-piece set effect is going to be unleash a Nova of Ice each time you defeat an enemy afflicted by your loss of control effects, dealing X damage to nearby enemies and freezing them for 4 seconds. And it cannot occur more than once every 40 seconds. Now, every single time if it says loss of control, it's a little bit wonky because supposedly the Feasting Barons pack in general has a little bit of what I would call an exception to it in terms of how well we rate this, because we don't actually are 100% certain on what counts as a loss of control to Blizzard. For example, based on what I've seen of Feasting Barons, it doesn't count for like Wizard's Black Hole, when I would consider that a loss of control effect. And so I'm not quite sure which exactly abilities count as a loss of control. And so again, this is a huge consideration when we're talking about that, because this set effect could be very solid, depending on whether or not what abilities count as loss of control. Next set is going to be the Isitar Imbued set, and the 6-piece version is going to give us an Orbiting Orb, Soul Orb. Every single time we defeat an enemy, we have a 10% chance to summon it for 12 seconds, and it deals X damage whenever it passes through an enemy. Once again, this will depend on what your character is actually at in terms of damage. And we cannot gain this Soul Orb more than once every 40 seconds. Very interesting one and could do some solid damage. Then we have the Vithu's Urges set effect, and we have a 6-piece set effect here that says each time you use a skill to buff yourself or a party member, you create an area of apotheosis for 12 seconds that grants 12% life drain to yourself and any party members in that area. Once again, a 40-second cooldown. Now, life drain is very rare, so this could be a very unique set effect. 3 more sets to go, and the next one's going to be the War Rags of Shal Boss. Now this 6-piece set effect is going to give our primary attacks a 5% chance to increase our attack speed for 12 seconds, and this cannot occur more than once every 40 seconds, which means we don't know how long or how much the attack speed steroid is, but it will increase it by X amount. Again, unsure how much the steroid actually is. Then we have the next one, which is going to be the Windloft Perfection. And in order to understand the 6-piece, we have to understand the 2-piece. And this is, we gain a buff called 1,000 Winds when we're in combat, which increases our movement speed by 15%. And it deactivates for 3 seconds if you take damage. And also, if you have the 4-piece set effect, which we will, this will also increase our damage by 20% when this buff is active. So with this buff, 15% movement speed, 20% damage when we have 1,000 Winds, and we get a shield at a 6-piece set effect that makes you immune to damage 5 times while 1,000 Winds is active. Cannot gain this shield more often than once every 40 seconds. So this 6-piece set effect basically guarantees that you're able to get your 15% movement speed and 20% damage, at least for the duration of 5 times. This again is 40-second cooldown. And our last 6-piece set effect is going to be the Shepherd's Call to Wolves, and this is a summon one where our summons can enter a frenzied state for 12 seconds every time one of them critically hits. The frenzied state increases their damage and attack speed by 60%, and it cannot occur more than once every 40 seconds. So that'll be the last one, and we're going to jump into the tier list, starting off with the Barbarian. All right, so we're going to start off with the Barbarian here, like I mentioned, and we have all 8 sets, and I have a little bit of a different tiered here, not just SAB. What I have is number 1 pick, which means this is the set I would prefer to farm, and some classes won't even have a number 1 pick because I'd rather run 2-2-2 or 2-4 on that class. Then we have very useful, and this is going to be a set that's actually going to be quite useful for that class, and will give a lot of bonuses, but perhaps isn't necessarily better than just farming a bunch of 2- and 4-piece sets, but you may just stumble upon it because you get good rolls and you happen to try to farm the other sets and you just happened into it. So that's why we have that category. Then we have situationally useful, which means, again, if you just stumble upon it in a 6-piece set and they just happen to be good stats, you'll get some use out of it, but not a whole lot. Not useful would mean that you're just absolutely not going to gain a whole lot of value. And then we have the 2- or 4-piece is great, but the 6-piece hardly does anything, which means that don't look at this set and say, oh, well, Isatar is in the not useful category, therefore I don't want to farm any of it. No, I just don't want to farm the 6-piece version of it. With all that being said, let's jump into the first set, which is the War Rags of Shawl Boss. And this one for me is going to be put in the situationally useful category. Now, I actually like the 2- and 4-piece set for the Barbarian, especially since you have Frenzy, and Frenzy itself is going to increase your attack speed, and therefore War Rags is going to get more value, at least from the 2-piece set. However, the fact that we don't know how much the attack speed actually increases it by, and on top of that, because the Barb already increases the attack speed, you may not even be able to actually take advantage of the massively increased attack speed, not only from the 4-piece version, but also from the 6-piece. So now we have so much attack speed on the Barb, I don't think we can actually get enough value from that unless you're in very, very easy content, which you're already bursting down. So again, you're not going to get that huge value from increased damage on a boss. And in PvP, you'll hardly ever get that many basics off to even get any value. And so I'm going to put it in this situationally useful category. Next up, we have the Isatar Imbued set, and I'm actually going to put this set in the very useful category. And the reason for this is I think that the Soul Orb, the 6-piece version that gives you the Soul Orb, that extra damage can be very, very useful because a lot of the times with the orb orbiting around you, you will also be running around people, whirlwinding, and therefore you could technically speed up the orb's travel by kind of moving your character around the enemy. Now, we don't know how fast the orb actually is when it moves around you. If it's extremely fast, we get a ton of procs and a ton of extra damage, and that could be very solid. And I rate damage very highly to speed up content. And so I want to put this in the very useful category, and I quite like the 2- and 4-piece versions for the Barbarian anyways. Then we have the Shepherd's Call to Wolves. Now, I'm going to put this in the not useful category. Now, I know someone's going to say, oh, well, we could do the hammer and then call down. And it's not going to be crazy value. Yes, you could speed up their attack speed and all that stuff for that one summon. But overall, you're going to get very, very minimal value. And so I'm going to put it in the not useful category. Definitely not going to get as much value from some of these other sets. So pretty simple. It's a summoning kind of build for the set item, and only a few classes can really get some good value out of it. Then we have Vithu's Urges, and for this one, I'm going to put this in the situationally useful category, but I could also see it in 2 or 4 pieces not great, or is great but not 6, because I actually really like the 2-piece Vithu set for the Barbarian. The fact that you would increase your self buffs and your sprint, and the shout buff that increases the party damage. All of that stuff is actually quite good. And the 6-piece set, I could see a very, very useful in certain circumstances where lifesteal may become a very profitable thing to have. The only problem is that in this game, typically you're getting one shot or you're not dying. And so I could see an argument for this placement, and honestly, maybe we should put it in that one because while I do think that the 6-piece set is situationally useful, I think that it more fits in this category because the 2- and 4-piece set versions are much better than the 6-piece versions, and you probably want to run a 2-piece or 4-piece set with Vithus on your Barbarian. Then we have Untouchable Mount Bank, and I want to put this in the very useful category as well. And this is because let's just take a free-to-play player who's got about 40k HP at the level that I'm at, maybe even more. You're going to be doing 16k damage if that shield pops. Again, we have a 25% chance. The cooldown is 9 seconds. Therefore, 1 out of every 4 times that shield is active, it will proc, meaning every 36 seconds, we're dealing 16k damage on an AoE around us while also getting the shield in addition, because that's part of the 2-piece set. Very, very solid set. And honestly, Untouchable Mount Bank is my personal favorite set for the melee classes in PvP, definitely. And because you're getting shields, because you're getting the extra damage, it actually is quite useful in PvE as well, especially if you just want to face tank bosses and then just smack back with your shield. Then we have the Windloft Perfection set, and I want to put this one in the situationally useful set, or category here. And the reason for this is the 2 and 4-piece set are absolutely not useful, in my opinion, for melee classes, because you need to not take damage for the buff to be active. However, the 6-piece set makes it so that you can at least tank a couple hits and get some value out of it. And so I could see this being situationally useful if you're able to dodge a lot of the damage. I could see this being quite solid, but a lot of cases, if you're running challenge rifts, elder rifts, dungeon runs, if you're running open world farming, you're never going to get use out of this. Even in PvP, you'll get a couple of seconds, maybe even if that, and then it will fall off and you'll have to wait for the cooldown to refresh, which is every 40 seconds, which is crazy. Then we have Grace of the Flagellant set, and for this one, I'm going to put this one in the situationally useful set. Honestly, actually, I'm going to put this in the very useful. And the reason for this is, if I'm rating damage high and I compare it to these other two, this is a 40-second cooldown, and it's going to do similar damage to the Untouchable Mount Bank and the Isitar Imbued, and so I could see this being very, very useful. On top of that, you actually get a chance to stun, so it's even more utility in PvP and slight utility in PvE. Now, keep in mind that this could also fit in the 2 or 4-piece version, because the 2-piece set is actually quite solid for the Barbarian. And so I could see that in the 4-piece as well, being very, very good. And that's why I'm going to put in the very useful, because it's not just the 6-piece version, because that damage is comparable. But on top of that, you're also getting the value from the 2 and 4-piece version. Then we have the Feasting Baron pack. And unfortunately, this is going to fit in the not useful category. And the reason for this is, we have tested a lot of the Barbarian, and if we compare it to the Chip of the Stone Flesh, which requires a loss of control as well, things like the Barbarian's Whirlwind with the Gathering does not count. And I earlier mentioned loss of control is very, very important to define, and we don't quite know how to define it for certain skills. And so if this works with the Gathering, if this works with those types of CC moves, I'm going to put it in the very useful category for PvP, and you could get some use out of it in PvE, but again, if you're talking about loss of control and your Whirlwind doesn't work, and you're not running Furious Charge in PvE, and we don't even know 100% if that one works, then I'm not going to see Feasting Barons do much, and so I'm going to put it in the not useful category. But this one, again, depends on how things shape up in the future. So overall, what I would say for the Barbarian is run a couple 2-piece sets, maybe a 4-piece set. Personally, if I were going to run the Barbarian, I would definitely pick up the 2-piece Vithus, the 2-piece Isitar, and the 2-piece Grace. If I was more of a PvPer, I would probably pick up the 6-piece or 4-piece Untouchable Mount Bank, and then perhaps a 2-piece Vithus to extend my sprint, to extend my buffs, and then run a 2-piece Untouchable. And then after that, I could mix and match, if I happen to have a War Rags of Shawl Boss, if I happen to have a, not really these two, but a bunch of 2-piece sets is what I would do for the Barbarian, which is why we don't have a number 1 pick category for the Barbarian. All right, so we're going to go to the Crusader now, and we're going to start off with a Feasting Barons pack. If you want to check out any of the classes, I'm going to have timestamps in on the little video right here and in the description down below if you want to check it out. But Feasting Barons pack for the Crusader, I'm going to put this one in the very useful category, and this is because if you go ahead and formulate your build where you're going to kind of work with a lot of the loss of control that the Crusader has, especially in PvP, this is going to do a lot of work. I guess it depends on how large the AoE actually is, but freezing someone for 4 seconds, granted it'll be less in PvP, it's going to be massive. On top of that, it does a lot of damage, and so you can actually get a lot of value from PvE content by just killing off random monsters around the area and doing a massive AoE. Very, very solid set, and I could see myself using a 6-piece Feasting Barons. However, some of the other parts of it perhaps might be not as good as some other pieces. Then we have the Grace of the Flagellant set. And again, I'm going to put this one in the very useful category because we have a lot of abilities to constantly proc it. The Spinning Shield, the Consecration, those types of abilities are going to go ahead and proc or have at least additional chances because it hits so often to proc that 4% chance and overall get some value from the damage of the Grace. Then we have the Isatar Imbued set. And again, I'm going to put this one in the very useful category. There isn't really a whole lot of difference between a Barbarian and Crusader from the value you get from this. It's going to circle around you. And if you're moving quickly, like on the horse, you can circle around them and you can get more value out of the Soul Orb. So you can get a lot of damage from that. Then we have the Untouchable Mountebank, and I'll put this one in the very useful category as well. You can see here we have a lot of very useful set items, and so we have a different situation where we could build quite a few of them on the Crusader. And so I'm going to say that with this Untouchable Mountebank here, really, this one's just going to do a lot of burst damage and then give you a little bit more survivability because you're going to include the 2 and 4 piece sets. So overall, I quite like the Untouchable Mountebank. Same logic for the Barbarian. It's going to do a lot of damage. It's going to keep you alive a little bit longer. And with the Crusader, at least, you're going to need a little bit more survivability compared to the Barb because they have the Undying Fury or Undying Rage. Then we have the War Rags of Shaw Boss set. And I'll put this one as situationally useful. And the reason why I put that as situationally useful is because you do primary attack a decent amount if you're on your horse. It increases your attack speed. You're going to attack speed a lot. And so you could get a lot of use out of that set, specifically when you're on your horse. But if you're meleeing or you're off the horse, it's going to be kind of okay. It's just not going to be super great compared to these other ones. And overall, if you're melee, you're going to get less basics off anyways compared to a ranged class. And so overall, situationally useful for me. Then we have the Shepherd's Call to Wolves, and this one's going to be in a not useful category. Once again, you could consider the Judgment ability that summons that one guy, but again, not a whole lot of value from the Shepherd's Call to Wolves for the Crusader because we're not a summoner. We have one ability. If we decide to run it, that's a singular summon. Then we have the Vithus Urges, and this one's going to go in the 2 or 4 pieces great, but not 6 because the 2-piece set helps out with your horse, helps out with a few other buffs for the Crusader. And so overall, very, very solid set, but not worth taking the 6-piece generally, unless there are some circumstances that you might need some healing on. But overall, that's going to be few and far between. Then we have the Windlaw Perfection set, and I'm going to put this one again in the situationally useful category, simply for the fact that Windlaw Perfection has the same logic for the Barbarian. It's going to knock off the damage, the immunity damage from the 6-piece set very quickly, and then you'll get no value from it. And so it can be okay for the temporary time that it's on. But after that, you kind of have to play around a lot of the damage and definitely be paying attention to avoid it all. And it's not even possible to avoid it all, especially since you're a Crusader running into the battle on the horse, and so very difficult. So really only one change, and that's the Feasting Barons pack. That's because I know some of the skills actually do work with this for the Crusader, whereas the Barb, I've found that most of the skills that you do use, even in PvP, don't really work with the Feasting Barons pack. Now on to the next class. On to the Demon Hunter, and we're going to start off with the Feasting Barons pack. Now I'm going to put this in not useful, and this is mainly because I believe that chill does not work with Feasting Barons pack, because if it does, I would put this in situationally useful, because that debuff is actually very strong, and you can run a lot of chill with the Demon Hunter. The problem is, loss of control most likely deals with like stuns and things like that, hard CC, and so soft CC, even though I think chill is super, super strong, doesn't necessarily work with Feasting Barons from what I've seen, because you can't proc chip from the chills, at least from the testing that I've done on Demon Hunter. Then we have Grace of the Flagellant. Now this set, I'm going to put in situationally useful, and the reason for this is because the 2-piece set isn't exceptionally good on the Demon Hunter, and the 6-piece forces you into a 2-piece set. Even though the 6-piece does very good damage and has a chance to stun, I would be okay with that. The problem is the 2-piece isn't going to be quite as good as some of the other versions of the sets out there. Then with the Isatar Imbued set, and this is definitely a 2 or 4 pieces great, but not 6. And the reason for this is if you're fighting a boss, if you're fighting a difficult character, you're not going to want to close enough for your Soul Orb to hit them. And so really you're going to want to focus on a 2-piece set for the movement speed increase. That is quite solid in a lot of areas of the game, that you want to keep up the movement speed with your Vengeance and move from target to target. But I don't like the 6-piece at all for Demon Hunter. Then we have the Untouchable Mountebank, and this one is going to be situationally useful for me. And the reason for this is you can get use out of this, especially if you're in PvP, because your life total is actually not that much different from your melee classes. The problem is that you need to be close to a target, and the only place that's going to happen realistically is probably PvP. If you're very close to your target in PvE, you're probably going to die, unless, of course, you're way ahead of your combat rating, and then you probably won't. But even then, you'd rather just run a different 6-piece for more damage, because you're not going to get an exceptional amount of damage from Mount Bank, especially since you're a ranged class. Then we have the War Rags of Shalt Boss. And for me, this is an absolute #1 pick. This is our first class that has a #1 pick. And the reason for this is all the other classes where I said, okay, you're not going to get max use out of the attack speed, this class can, because you're constantly attacking. You can move and shoot. You can cast your abilities within your attacks. Very, very, very good to increase your attack speed, because it basically just overall increases your damage 99% of the time. Very much like the War Rags of Shalt Boss, and definitely would want to farm for the 2-piece, the 4-piece, and the 6-piece. All of them interact with primary attack. It's basically the Demon Hunter go-to set. Then we have the Shepherd's Call to Wolves, and you know what's funny about this was I'm going to put this one in situationally useful, and the reason for this is there's a lot of legendary items that modify sentries, and you can actually put 3 sentries down, and so because of this, I think that if you boost your sentries by 60% damage at 60% attack speed, it actually could be an interesting build. Now, I haven't been able to test triple sentry with the damage increase from Shepherds, because we need a 6-piece Shepherds and the sentry build, but I think this could be situationally useful, and perhaps situationally the best damage set possible by buffing your sentries over and over again, which would be quite good, at least for those 12 seconds in the boss fight. I could see us doing a lot of damage. All right, so next up we have the Vithu's Urges set, and I'll put this one in the not useful category. And the reason for this is I don't think that the 2 or 4-piece set is even great on the Demon Hunter compared to War Rags of Shalt Boss, and so I don't even want the 6-piece because you can't group buff, so you can only do it for yourself, and just overall not very useful. Then we have the Windloft Perfection set, and I want to put this one as very useful, and the reason for this one is as a ranged class, you're not going to take nearly as many hits as a melee class, and the fact that you have 5 additional immune hits, that'll basically give you a flat 20% and 15% movement speed increase and 20% damage increase. That is actually very good to just constantly have on you because of the immunity that you're getting every 40 seconds. So very much like the Windloft Perfection set for your ranged classes, but not for your melee classes. All right, so on to the monk, and these sets are, a lot of them are influenced by a few other content creators that are actually monks, as well as some of the Barbarian and other tiers. But first off, we have the Feasting Barons pack, and I'll put this one as situationally useful. And the reason for this is twofold. One, you're mobile, you're going to be running after the ranged classes in PvP, you're going to be running around a lot, and not necessarily in the fight all the time. And so, because of that, when you kill someone, you may not actually get the AoE off in the right place, and so it can be good. And on top of that, you may not even be running CC abilities in PvE content, which means it'll be completely useless in PvE content. So overall, okay, but not great. Then we have the Grace of the Flagellant set, and this one I'm going to put as situationally useful. And the reason for this is the 2-piece set, pretty terrible, but the 4 and 6-piece set, you can get incidental value out of it just because it's more damage the more times you hit, and so you can get value, but overall this 2-piece set is what's really holding the Grace of the Flagellant set back for the monk. Then we have the Issatar Imbued set, and I'm going to put this one as a very useful one, and the reason for this is because your basic teleports, you can oftentimes get the movement speed enough to teleport to the next enemy, and then go ahead and keep stacking that and getting a lot of movement speed, damage, and all that stuff. And then on top of that, you're gonna have that soul orb, so you can constantly stick on people from that teleport. So very, very solid set here overall, because you're just getting a lot of damage from the soul orb, constantly being able to stick on someone, and overall just getting a lot of value from the Issatar. Then Untouchable Mount Bank, and for me, this is the #1 pick for the monk. And the reason for this is the monk is constantly jumping around. It's constantly sticking on to your opponent. So you'll basically always get the AoE off in the right place because you're melee and you'll be sticking on to someone. The shield is going to be nice for the monk survivability, and the damage will be very, very nice for the monk as well. Overall, I would recommend people running the Untouchable Mount Bank simply because while their PvE is slightly weaker, this will help them become a powerhouse in PvP, even though they already are quite solid in PvP. But even in PvE, you'll get a lot of damage from the Mount Bank set, whereas none of the other sets really give you a whole lot of damage from their set. Then we have War Rags of Shalboss, and this one's going to be a situationally useful one, because again, you do basic a lot. Problem is that you're a melee class. However, the melee class in this case does teleport, and so you do get value from there. But overall, just not a great one to increase your attack speed, because you're not going to constantly be attacking someone with basics as a melee class. Then we have the Shepherd's Call to Wolves, and this one, I thought about putting in the very useful category, but to me, I'm going to put this in the situationally useful category, because the Monk does have the Mystic Allies. It can run Echoing Shade. Boosting up your Mystic Allies here could be very, very good overall for damage potential, but the problem is that you do have the Untouchable Mount Bank to compete with, and this really only affects your Mystic Allies, and so you're not going to get a crazy amount of value, but when your Mystic Allies are out, they can be absolute powerhouses when that does happen. Then we have the Vithus Urges, and for me, this one is a 2-piece is great, but not 6, and that is because, again, the lifesteal isn't going to be a huge deal. You're often not running big group buffs, and you're oftentimes running the Shield of Zen, which is a 2-person buff, so yes, you can spread it to another person. But overall, I'd rather just have the duration and then go with a different 2 or 4-piece set, perhaps like an Isatar 4 plus a Vithus 2, something like that. Or just running pure Mount Bank because I think that's so good. Then we have the Windlaw of Perfection, and to me, this is going to be a situationally useful set. And the reason for this is, once again, you're a melee class, you're going to take damage a lot, so you're going to lose that 1,000 wins buff often, and so you're not going to get a whole lot of value from this set. On to the Necro, and starting off with the Feasting Barons pack, based on the information that I've heard from Darth Microtransaction, another content creator friend who's played a bunch of Monk, you can frequently proc the Chip of the Stone Flesh, which means you can frequently proc the Feasting Barons effect if you happen to kill someone, and therefore I'm going to put this as very useful. As a Necro, you're usually playing support, which means you're fighting or hitting the front line, therefore you're hitting a lot of the melee classes, and if you happen to kill someone, the effect will spread and just hit everyone in that area. Or if you're in PvE and you're using some CC abilities, maybe knocking someone aside or knocking up, you'll go ahead and get a proc there, so some extra damage there. Overall, a very solid set for the Necro, and I can see a lot of use for the Feasting Barons pack overall. Then we have the Grace of the Flagellant set, and for this one, I'm going to put this one as a very useful set, and the reason for this is the Necro actually has a lot of continual damage, things like that. For the 2-piece, the 4-piece, and the 6-piece are just extra damage, and so I actually think the Grace has a lot of potential for the Necro just to do a lot of damage. Again, this is basically a pure damage set, and I see no wrong with that. I really quite like a lot of the damage sets, and so I think the Grace fits right at home. Then we have the Isatar Imbued set, and for this one, I'm going to put this one as not useful, unfortunately, because the problem with the Necro is that although you're ranged and you can move and then attack, move and then attack from a range distance, problem is the Soul Orb is not going to do a whole lot of damage because you're ranged, and then you're also not going to get a whole lot of value from the 2 or 4-piece sets because you don't have a lot of movement speed amplifiers, and the one you do prevents you from attacking during the duration, so not that great. Then we have the Untouchable Mount Bank, and for me, this one's going to be a situationally useful item. Once again, the Necro is a ranged class, therefore you're not going to get a lot of value, consistent value from this. However, in some scenarios in PvP, a lot of people dive the Necros, and therefore, during that scenario, you can proc it and get a lot of damage off. And the Untouchable Mount Bank, just having a shield overall is just very, very good. So I usually highly rate that part of it, and that is included in the 6-piece version. Then we have the War Rags of Shalboss, and this one is going to be in a situationally useful category because in PvE content, I could see you getting a decent amount of value from the War Rags of Shalboss at primary attack speed increase and the damage and all that stuff, because your summons, if you're running a PvE build, oftentimes it'll be a summon build. Therefore, you're going to get a lot of extra basic attacks because your summons will be dealing damage and you can just basic attack behind them. So you get a lot of primary attacks off. Next up, we have the Shepherd's Call to Wolves, and for me, I'm going to put this one at very useful. Now, I might get some complaints about that, saying, oh, it's a #1 pick. However, I don't think you're going to be consistently always running summons, and that's the problem. You kind of need summons for this to be useful, and although there are a lot of builds that do run full summons in PvP, even in PvE, or even in PvP, the PvP build usually is a lot of support with Bone Pillar and things like that. So you might not get a whole lot of value from that. And even in challenge rifts, oftentimes I've seen a lot of Necros not run summon builds because they're just too squishy because your combat rating is so far beneath them. So you're not going to get a whole lot of value in those type of scenarios. However, if you're talking about standard PvE, fighting against bosses, things like that, this is an absolute amazing set. And so I would put this close to the #1 pick, but not quite. Then we have the Vithus Urges set. For me, this is a 2 or 4 piece is great, but not 6. I quite like the extended beneficial effect duration on the Necro, especially for some certain key skills. So very, very nice set to have, but not the 6-piece version. And then we have the Windlaw of Perfection one, and this one to me is going to be put into the very useful category. And the reason for this is getting an actual damage, extra movement speed is very, very nice. And the fact that you have summons, oftentimes, they actually block a lot of the damage that you might have taken. And so those summons will also get the damage increase and overall just give you a lot of damage across the board. And so because you'll be able to keep up the buff oftentimes, it's nice to have this set. Then we have the last class, which is Wizard. And for this one, we're going to start off with the Feasting Barons pack. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to put this one as I'm going to tackle between situationally useful and not useful. And the reason for this is I've heard that Black Hole does not work with Feasting Barons pack. And unfortunately, I have not tested it since the initial couple of weeks when we were testing everything. And so I can't say for certain that this actually works for Black Hole. If it does, I would actually probably put it in the very useful category because the way the Black Hole works is you pull everyone together. So you actually get a proc of it on everyone in the area if you happen to kill someone. Very, very good, especially in PvP. However, I'm going to put it in situationally useful, simply for the fact that I think the only thing that actually works with it is some of the chilling rays and such. And so, not super great, but can be okay in some scenarios. If it worked with Black Hole and all the CC that happened to be on the Wizard, I'd probably put it in the very useful category. But I'm going to leave it in the situationally useful category for now. Then we have the Grace of the Flagellant set, and I'm going to put this one... Ooh, it's tough for me. Wizard's actually one of the harder versions because I'm not sure if I want to put it as the #1 pick or the very useful category. The thing is, the 2-piece set is so good, as well as the 4-piece version, and the 6-piece version just more damage. So I could see a very useful, but you might want to run up with another 2-piece version of another set just because you may want extra something out there. But honestly, now that I'm looking at some of the other sets here, I'd probably put it at the #1 pick, simply for the fact that I don't think you want to run like a 4-piece Grace and a 2-piece version of any of these sets. I think that you just want to run a full Grace of the Flagellant 6-piece set, all damage for the Wizard. So I'm going to put that #1 pick for me. Then we have the Issatar Imbued set, and this one is going to be a situationally useful set. Maybe even closer to the not useful version because you're not going to take a whole lot of advantage of the movement speed, generally speaking, because if you're running a lot of the more difficult PvE content, you're channeling, and so you can't get used out of the kills that you might get. And then, of course, your range through the Soul Orb is not going to do a lot of damage because it's not going to be orbiting close enough to the enemies. So situationally useful because you can get a lot of damage, but you have to make sure that your Soul Orb is hitting them. Then you have Untouchable Mountebank, and I'm going to put this one as a not useful. And this is the only class I will do it for, and that is because the Wizard has a lot of scenarios where you're teleporting away, so it's a ranged class that not only has the ranged kind of downside to the ability to kind of proc the big damage, but also they have the teleport, which oftentimes gets them away from the melee classes anyways, and so very, very difficult to get use out of this. And even the 2- and 4-piece set, I wouldn't put it in this category because I'm not a huge fan of the extra tiny shield, the 13% or later on the 33% shield on the Wizard. I'd prefer just to kind of manage your teleports and things like that better, whereas the other classes like Necro and the Demon Hunter doesn't have as much control over the battlefield in terms of movement speed and CC, so they may actually get value out of this, whereas the Wizard, I think, could just outpace a lot of classes and just not get a lot of use out of this. Then the War Rags of Shalboss. I'm going to put this one as situationally useful. You could argue for very useful. I think that the Wizard doesn't actually primary attack enough to get enough value out of War Rags 6-piece. However, I do think that 2 and 4-piece sets are solid, but not great. If you primary attacked more and you didn't have so many channeling skills that you oftentimes use, I would put this at a very useful. Problem is that it's not really nearly as much primary attacking as the Necro or Demon Hunter does, and so situationally useful for me. Then the Shepherd's Call to Wolves. For me, this is going to be a not useful set. You don't really have summons as the Wizard, and that's pretty much where the conversation ends. So not useful for me. Then the Vithu's Urges. This one's a 2 or 4-piece is great, but not 6. Simply for the fact that you can run the 2-piece and get some extra beneficial effect duration from some of the skills that you can run. And that could be useful, but overall, not a huge fan of the 6-piece set. And then we have Windloft Perfection, and for me, that's a very useful set. You're going to get the movement speed, which you can't take full value out of compared to some other classes, but the damage increase is going to be massive, especially since you can keep your distance and not take damage often. So 20% damage increase just is huge, and the fact that it considerably increases your uptime for that because you're going to be immune to those stray hits. I very much like the 6-piece set for the Wizard, but I think it's a step down from the Grace. And once again, the reason why I put Grace at #1 pick is because if you're not running the Grace 6-piece set, you're going to want to run the Grace 4-piece set. And what other 2-piece set could you run? Maybe Vithu's, maybe War Rags, not Windloft Perfection because you're going to get the movement speed and that's not huge. So really it's down to like War Rags or Vithu's, and I'd rather just have a little bit of extra damage from the 6-piece from Grace than a 4-piece Grace and a 2-piece Vithu's. But that's me personally. Some other builds and some people who like those builds may want to run a 2-piece Vithu's on top of their 4-piece Grace. So there you have it. There's Wizard, there's Monk, there's Barbarian, there's all of them. All of them are in the tier list, and you can go ahead and click through the video where if you want to come back to it. I did the set item tier list last time, and I kind of just said the tiers, and I kind of decided to go a different route here, so that way you could actually see it at the end of every single category and come back to it. That way you don't have to kind of click around through the video and all that. Hopefully that was much better for you all. Let me know what you all think. Again, I have played more than half of these classes, a considerable amount, as well as spent a lot of time with a lot of other content creators that have invested hundreds of hours into their class. And so I've got a lot of information from them. So that's where the information is mostly coming from. If you have any disagreements, please let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you for the next video.